Michelle Bachmann actually predicted that I would bring about the biblical end of days. Now that's a legacy. That's big. I mean, Lincoln, Washington, they didn't do that.
I finally fell asleep and dreamed I was walking along a village road. Children dressed only in strings of beads played in front of the round huts, and several old men waved to me as I passed. But as I went farther along, I began to notice that people were looking behind me fearfully, rushing into their huts as I passed. I heard the growl of a leopard and started to run into the forest, tripping over roots and stumps and vines, until at last I couldn't run any longer and I fell to my knees in the middle of a bright clearing. Panting for breath, I turned around to see the day turn to night, and a giant figure looming as tall as the trees, wearing only a loincloth and a ghostly mask. The lifeless eyes bored into me, and I heard a thunderous voice saying only that it was time, and my entire body began to shake violently with the sound, as if I were breaking apart. I jerked up with a sweat, hitting my head against the wall lamp that stuck out above the bunk. In the darkness, my heart slowly evened itself, but I couldn't get back to sleep again.
When the president goes sightseeing, the sight you see is him pointing at the pyramid.
This is bigger, isn't it?
Pointing in a mosque where the press had to don those embarrassing booties, a fate the president and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton avoided by going shoeless, as a tour guide demonstrated the acoustics.
My voice carries.
The president's voice carried at Cairo University, where he kept quoting the Quran for his Muslim audience.
The Holy Quran tells us, O mankind.
The audience was kind to President Obama.
Thank you.
President Obama spoke so much about his Muslim experiences that the website Wonket jokingly called this his Ich bin ein Muslim speech. The president even rattled off a few phrases in Arabic.
Shukran. Saka. Assalamu alaikum. E pluribus unum.
Wait a minute, that last one wasn't Arabic, that was Latin. It's what's inscribed on a quarter.
Out of many, one.
The president touring the pyramids, outside and in.
Purification, mummification.
Self-identification.
That looks like me. Look at those ears.
Separated at birth from a hieroglyphic, but the president's guide saw another resemblance.
Mr. President, you look like King Tut.
I've been told.
Yes, it's true.
He should know about King Tut. Dr. Sahi Hawass oversaw scans of Tut's mummy that produced this likeness. Though President Obama tends to skip the eye makeup, the president's trip inspired Egyptians to display decorations calling Obama the new King Tut of the world. But even the new King Tut couldn't budge a pyramid. Still, it's good practice for trying to push peace in the Mideast. Ginny Mo, CNN, New York.
Coming to the finish, American Pharaoh and Victor Espinoza have won the Kentucky Derby! Firing Line was second, Dortmund was third, Frosted finished fourth in a final time of 2 minutes 3.02 seconds. Victor Espinoza has won the Kentucky Derby 2 years in a row. He is 5 lengths in front as they come to the wire, and American Pharaoh and Victor Espinoza have won the Preakness over Tail of Verve. Victor Espinoza and Bob Baffert get yet another chance at a Triple Crown in 3 weeks at Belmont Park.
But of course, let's face it, there is one issue on every reporter's minds, and that is 2016.
It may be the biggest marketing deal in horse racing history. Various reports say the owner of Triple Crown contender American Pharaoh has signed a sponsorship agreement with Monster Beverages, and it could top 7 figures.
I'm just shocked that people are doing things like this, and I think it's the end of civilization as we know it. No, it's fun, it's cool. I like looking, I just saw a list of weird places for advertising, and you know, this is going to make the list. I mean, we've already got like on eggs, on people, in outer space, and now horses.
The owners were
afterwards,
talking about
right?
hoping that the monster would jazz the horse up, so maybe that's after. Maybe that's the after party.
And here it is. The 37-year wait is over. American Pharaoh is finally the one. American Pharaoh has won the Triple Crown.
He did it! American Pharaoh has ended the 37-year drought to a deafening roar from the fans here at Belmont Park.
I'm telling you, in the first run, I was just like, that's the best feeling I ever have.
We could get a third Obama term after all. Could happen. And welcome to the fourth quarter of my presidency. I am determined to make the most of every moment I have left.
Well, conspiracy theories are running wild tonight about the Army's plan for a multi-state training exercise this summer called Jade Helm 15. While the military says it's just training soldiers for the realities of war, critics say the Army is preparing for modern-day martial law.
This is Reverend Ronald Wright, and you want to talk about holy rhetoric. This might be as far from it as possible. Watch.
We're setting the stage for a terrorist attack in this country, and the group is not going to be ISIS, it's going to be USIS.
One of the fundamental things about America is dissent and the ability to have dissent. And it needs to be peaceful. There needs to be repercussions for people who do not act in a peaceful way. But confronting protesters with armored personnel carriers is thoroughly un-American, and for 150 years we've had rules separating the military, keeping the military out of policing affairs. But you sort of obscure that separation if you allow the police to become the military. In FEMA's authorized equipment list, there's actually written descriptions for how the equipment should be used, and it says it's specifically not supposed to be used for riot suppression. Mr. Estevez, in the NPR investigation of the 1033 program, they list that 12,000 bayonets have been given out. What purpose are bayonets being given out for?
Senator, bayonets are available under the program. I can't answer what a local police force would need a bayonet.
I can give you an answer: none.
Okay.
So what's President Obama's administration's position on handing out bayonets to the police force? It's on your list. You guys create the list. You're going to take it off the list. We're going to keep doing it.
We are going to look at what we are providing under the administration's review of all these programs.
So it's unclear at this point whether President Obama approves of 12,000 bayonets being given out.
The president also, I think, is trying to find his footing to prepare America for probably some more beheadings. I mean, he has to be sober-minded about that.
26-year-old terror suspect Usama Rahim, killed in that deadly confrontation with officers, initially wanted to go to New York to behead conservative activist Pamela Geller, the woman who sponsored that Mohammed cartoon drawing contest in Texas. But the FBI says on Tuesday morning, Rahim, seen here in his high school yearbook, changed his plan, wanting instead to behead uniformed police officers in Massachusetts. When anti-terrorism agents confronted him in the CVS parking lot, Rahim allegedly lunged at them with this military-style knife. Some of these allegations detailed in a criminal complaint that led to the arrest of Raheem's nephew, David Wright, for conspiring in the attacks. Raheem told Wright about the knife in a cell phone conversation, allegedly saying, "I just got myself a nice little tool, good for carving." The FBI tracking the men 24/7. They say Tuesday, just 2 hours before he died, Raheem called Wright, telling him he was about to go after the boys in blue, calling them the easiest target. We tried speaking with Raheem's family.
Is there anything you want people to know about your brother?
But they did not want to comment. Local Muslim leaders who knew Raheem say he was not radical.
Is he somebody who could have been inspired by ISIS to kill police officers?
I have no information regarding that. The government officials can tell you better.
But you said you know him. Were you surprised when you heard that?
I was surprised.
All right, another clip from your email. Why September 20th is significant, I don't know, but listen to this now.
The event in which I planned on Tuesday, September the 20th, in Washington, D.C., would have been a great attack against America. Even with my capture, its repercussions will not stop.
Wow. What's that all about?
You know, he comes right out and says it's his plan to put bullets in President Obama's head, then kill members of the House of Representatives and the Senate. He also wants to take out the Israeli embassy.
I would have took my gun, I would have put it to Obama's head, I would have pulled the trigger, then I would unleash more bullets on the Senate and the House of Representative members, then I would attack the Israeli embassy and various other buildings full of kuffar who want to wage war against us Muslims.
His whole idea behind, he was arrested in January in Cincinnati at a gun store after he bought 2 guns and 600 rounds of ammunition. And he told me that it was his intent that day to set off pipe bombs outside the Capitol, to induce panic, to have people running outside the building so he could start picking them off with his gun. And then he wanted to go to the president and he wanted to put bullets in his head.
Tricia Mackey, thank you for sharing that with our viewers today.
From Scripture, we learn of the miracle of restoration. You who have made me see many troubles and calamities will revive me again. From the depths of the earth, you will bring me up again. You will increase my greatness and comfort me again.
This is the first look.
This is the first look
at this first modern room in the White House.
We're so excited about the Alma Thomas piece. It's Resurrection.
It's Resurrection.
Alma Thomas is the first African American female artist to be shown here at the White House.
John Boehner's already invited Netanyahu to speak at my funeral. Somebody's got to do it.
We're going to all become godlike cyborgs, joining forces with the machines to evolve into creatures that could live forever.
The researchers here are looking for what they call dark matter, thought of as a cosmic tree from which our galaxies, shown in pink, grew like blossoms. So how long before they discovered the first hard evidence for it?
It could be as early as this year. Summer may be a bit hard, but late summer maybe could be as early as September if we're really lucky.
The current theory explains how just 5% of the universe works. Researchers hope they'll soon find evidence of mind-bending new theories that involve extra dimensions, invisible so-called supersymmetric particles, and ones from what researchers call the dark universe.
We will merge with machines, something that has been long known as the singularity, and that means that we will finally be able to conquer death, because as our parts fail, we can replace them with hardware. Google is investing billions of dollars, and they actually, they're one of the title sponsors of something called Singularity University. They hired Raymond Kurzweil, who is the guy who invented the term singularity, so it's becoming science fact. Where I disagree with this professor is he thinks that there's going to be big disparity between the haves and have-nots. We know that's not true with technology. We know that if that were true, only 1% of people would own cars. 95% of American households own cars. You know, they thought the same with VCRs and personal computers.
Yes,
However,
homeless
people
people.
always find a way, and he says perhaps that's what's driving people to seek this technological immortality, is our drive to want to constantly upgrade ourselves.
Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Fact is, though, at this point, my legacy is finally beginning to take shape.
We look at the problems that are confronting this country around the world, and you look at ISIS, for example. ISIS was created by Barack Obama.
We have been allied with ISIS in Syria. They have had a safe haven because we have been arming the rebels to keep Assad away from them, and now they go back and forth. So I think our intervention in Syria has led precisely to
it
what's
may
going on in
have,
Iraq.
Senator, but when
It sounds, frankly, like a nightmare. A group of extremists bent on atrocities is now openly and officially targeting Christians in Iraq. What's going on?
This is truly a living nightmare that's not going away. Christianity in Mosul is dead, and a Christian Holocaust is in our midst. 7 weeks ago, we went to Washington, D.C., and we actually were calling this a Christian genocide. And since then, day by day, it's getting worse and worse. More children are being beheaded. Mothers are being raped and killed. Fathers are being hung. But right now, 300,000 Christians are in Iraq, fleeing, living in neighboring cities, just wanting a chance not just to survive, but to live.
I want to go back, forgive me for interrupting, I want to go back to something you said, because the atrocities committed by ISIS are well known, but still you're startling me with the severity of what you're describing. You say they are beheading children?
They are systematically beheading children and mothers and fathers. The world hasn't seen an evil like this for generations. There's actually a park in Mosul that they've actually beheaded children and put their heads on a stick, and they have them in the park. This is crimes against humanity.
But ISIS doesn't care, because they have a kind of apocalyptic view of what they are doing. They truly believe that the end times are here, that they are part of a cosmic struggle between good and evil, and they're the good guys. This is arguably the most successful terrorist group in history in terms of recruitment and land that it controls. But their worldview is that they are leading the fight to bring true Islam to the Muslim world.
Christians, 95% of all Christians in Mosul have fled, and 5% have converted. They've marked the red death stamp of ISIS on Christian homes, and basically saying, we know who you are, and if you come back, you will get killed.
This is almost, I'm going to ask, forgive me for interrupting, this is almost a kind of a plague out of biblical times. They're literally marking the doors of Christian homes?
They are, and with the Nestorian, with the letter N, to mark them as Christians. And that's why we're saying this is a Christian Holocaust within our midst, and the world community cannot turn a blind eye on something so tragic. So much of crimes are coming out. Children are being beheaded. Folks are being killed just because they're being Christian. And it's happening right now.
Once again, acknowledging the atrocities of the crimes that have been committed by ISIS. Genocide is a very powerful word. Do you literally think that ISIS is trying to kill all of the Christians who fall in its hands?
They're absolutely killing every Christian they see. This is a genocide in every sense of the word. And they want everyone to convert, and they want Sharia law to be the law of the land. And we're talking about a place where Christianity was founded over 1,800 years ago. They bombed the church last week. That was 1,800-year-old church. And they're systematically destroying churches. They've already bombed 6 churches in the area.
And no one stopped them. Mark Arabo, speaking on behalf of the Christians of Iraq. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Okay, with your expertise and experience, why do they go after the Christians?
Well, look, in addition to fighting sort of a military campaign, ISIS has a really apocalyptic view of things. I mean, they look at this as the end of times. So this is not just a battle. They're not just carving out a territory. The world is effectively coming to an end. Islam is going to triumph, and everybody else is going to be annihilated. So when you really get down to the core of it, that's That's actually the way they think.
Since the downfall of the country's longtime dictator, Muammar Gaddafi, 4 years ago, Libya's descended into a chaotic civil war. And in the lawlessness, ISIS has gained a foothold, seizing towns and cities. The group announced its arrival in Libya with trademark brutality. 2 videos showing the beheadings of Christians. Abdullah al-Fortia is a commander in Western Libya's security forces and told us ISIS is a cancer and Libya the weakened body it's invaded.
Everywhere after the war, the country or like this, the government is not strong enough, and that time the people is coming.
ISIS is coming.
This type of people, ISIS is coming, yes, after the war.
A senior US official told us that so far, ISIS has fewer than 5,000 fighters in Libya and estimates that half of them came here from other countries. But in the few months they've been operating here, the extremists have made rapid gains.
The president also, I think, is trying to find his footing to prepare America for probably some more beheadings. I mean, he has to be sober-minded about that. We might not know how he actually feels at this moment until years from now when he writes his memoirs.
The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam.
All right, happening now, Iraqis fleeing 3 towns on the banks of the Euphrates River. There are new concerns that the river's water level is so low that ISIS fighters can just walk across and launch attacks.
That's after ISIS militants, they shut off the gates of the Ramadi Dam. This new strategy presenting a major security and humanitarian threat.
I mean, I've said this to leaders both in the Islamic and Arab world and to the world in general. This is a third world war by other means.
The fact is that ISIS has a lot of momentum right now. So what we're dealing with is a central government that has, in essence, practically lost control over large sections of the country and large sections of its armed forces. It's a very dangerous situation to be in.
From Fallujah and Ramadi in the west and Beiji and Mosul in the north, U.S. military officials privately acknowledge in these Sunni areas, ISIS has gained ground and is not on the defensive, as the Pentagon has publicly said. ISIS' stockpile of captured weapons provided by the U.S. to the Iraqis is growing, Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi says.
We lost around 2,300 Humvees in Mosul alone, and we are going to lose more tanks and Humvees.
All of this raising urgency at the White House, the Pentagon, and the CIA about what happens if Abadi cannot win against ISIS.
Bureaucratic red tape slowing down the air war against ISIS, according to an Air Force general and a fighter pilot we talked to. That pilot telling Fox News he sometimes would have terrorists in his sights, but could not get permission to fire in time. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon with more. Jennifer.
John, there's growing discontent among U.S. military pilots carrying out the air war against ISIS over Iraq and Syria over the excessive rules of engagement hindering them from striking targets. They blame a bureaucracy that does not allow for quick decision-making. A former U.S. Air Force general who led air campaigns over Iraq and Afghanistan says today's pilots are being micromanaged and the process for ordering strikes is slow.
You're talking about hours in some cases, which by that time the particular tactical target has left the area and or the aircraft has run out of fuel. These are excessive procedures that are handing our adversary an advantage.
In the first Gulf War, the U.S. averaged 1,125 strikes a day. In Kosovo, 135 strikes per day. In 2003, in Iraq, 800 strikes per day. But against ISIS, pilots are flying only 14 strikes per day. One Navy F-18 pilot who's flown missions against ISIS voiced his frustration to Fox News, quote, "There were times I had groups of ISIS fighters in my sights, but couldn't get clearance to engage. They probably killed innocent people and spread evil because of my inability to kill them. It was frustrating." General Deptula blames the White House for the bottleneck.
In this particular case, the ultimate guidance rests in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Being president is never easy. I still have to fix a broken immigration system. issue veto threats, negotiate with Iran, all while finding time to pray 5 times a day. In all fairness, my middle name is Hussein. What's their excuse?
You know, as I think most Americans began to understand in the wake of September 11th, the difference between Sunni and Shia, I don't think many Americans would have assumed that at any point in the future we would be confronting both and losing, in effect, to both the Shia and the Sunni in the region. But that's precisely what's happening, isn't it? At least right now.
It is. We are falling back in front of the Sunni-led Islamic State. And on the other hand, we see Tehran gaining influence in regional capital after regional capital. Tehran dominates events in Baghdad, in Damascus, increasingly in Sana'a, in Yemen, and in Beirut. So we have the difficulties with the Shia. We have the radical side of Sunni. I think our real hope, Lou, is to partner with the more moderate Sunni states in the region who have been our traditional allies, like Egypt and Saudi Arabia. But it is fraught with danger.
I don't recall an administration in which the American people were expected to blindly follow the policy of an administration that had not bothered to seek national consensus, nor partner with either the Senate or the House, or articulate for our world allies their vision of the world, the region, in which there is still a raging conflict 14 years since September 11th.
Even in our time, the desire for peace and the commitment to build peace collide against the reality of many armed conflicts presently affecting our world. They are a kind of third world war being fought piecemeal, and in the context of global communications, we sense an atmosphere of war.
He's test firing, recalibrating, and threatening to attack. As Kim Jong-un races to perfect his ballistic missile capabilities, there are serious questions tonight about whether the U.S. can defend against that threat. The anti-missile systems that would shoot down North Korean missiles may not work. There are wiring problems with American interceptors, according to a new report from the government watchdog GAO. Those are ground-launched systems based in California and Alaska. GAO says the wiring and soldering problems it found on the interceptors could cause corrosion later, quote, leaving the warfighter with an interceptor fleet that may not work as intended. This comes as the U.S. and South Korea, according to South Korea's national news agency, are ramping up their defenses against the North Korean submarine threat. An Aegis destroyer, a P-8 Poseidon plane, and submarines are taking part in large-scale joint exercises in the waters off South Korea.
Well, we have new information on China's vision for its military forces as there are growing concerns over Beijing's aggressive posturing in Asia. In a new policy paper, China outlines plans to shift its military to become an offensive force for the very first time.
China is preparing for a maritime military struggle and is expanding the strength and scope of its navy. A document published by the State Council, China's cabinet, illustrates the strategy, including refocusing the Chinese Air Force from defense to both defense and offense. This comes as tensions rise in the South China Sea, where satellite images reveal China is reclaiming reefs to create islands in territory also claimed by Taiwan, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Vietnam. The U.S. says these islands will host airstrips and military installations. Juan Zarate is a CBS News national security analyst.
So what you have is a China that is growing in power, it's willing to flex its muscles, and certainly doesn't want to be dictated to by the U.S. or other powers in the region. It is going to grow in power militarily, politically, economically, and it is going to be a force to be reckoned with.
The U.S. military flew a surveillance plane over the disputed areas just last week with a TV crew on board and defied warnings by China to get out.
This is a Chinese Navy. Please go away quickly.
The U.S. said it was flying in international airspace. China's government called the move dangerous.
Well, not wishing to alarm, but there is a warning that World War III will erupt in just a few years unless the U.S. financial system loosens up on China. Who's telling us that? Billionaire investor George Soros, that's who. He says America needs to let Beijing join the global currency basket, or the consequences could prove catastrophic.
If there is conflict between China and a military ally of the United States, like Japan, then it is not an exaggeration to say that we are on the threshold of a third world war.
To avoid disaster, he goes on to say, Washington should strengthen its economic ties with Beijing, and it's not the only fly in the ointment either. China's clearly irked by the US building up its military presence in the region right now. On Thursday, Beijing issued 8 warnings over American spy planes swooping over the South China Sea.
Now we're seeing that they're partnering up with Russia and going back to what they know best, the use of force.
Right, and that's the real problem. You have both Putin and Xi Jinping. They see their interests are converging. They're trying to redraw their maps by taking their boundaries outwards, and they're supporting each other. The Chinese are financing Putin's aggression in the Ukraine. These are very important areas, especially the South China Sea, where you have $5.3 trillion of commerce goes over that water each year. It's more important than the Suez and Panama canals combined.
So if they seize control, what's the fallout for the rest of the world on this one?
The problem is it's not only the South China Sea, but you'll see other countries trying to close off international water. You know, the prosperity of the world after World War II is because of the open system that Washington enforced. Now, if we're not going to have that system, we're not going to have the global commerce and the prosperity that really carried the world for 7 decades.
A colossal threat of renewal of full-scale military actions by the Russian terrorist groups remains. Now on the territory of Ukraine, there are 14 Russian tactical groups with the total number of personnel exceeding 9,000 servicemen. Concentration of the Russian servicemen near the state border is bigger by half than a year ago. The military must be ready as much for a renewal of an offensive by the enemy in the Donbass as they are for a full-scale invasion along the whole length of the border with Russia. We must truly ready for this.
Massive Russian military vehicles on the move, part of a surprise military drill ordered by Vladimir Putin. Tactical live fire exercises involving 12,000 Russian soldiers and up to 250 aircraft in an intimidating show of force. Meanwhile, American and European forces begin scheduled drills in the Arctic Circle, involving over 4,000 personnel and around 100 fighter jets. The goal is to ramp up military readiness, but with 2 competing military exercises, there are echoes of a frightening time.
It has an eerie feeling of the challenge and testing and sort of the muscle flexing of the Cold War days.
Putin is testing NATO and the U.S., analysts say, to see if they're ready for confrontation. He's held several snap exercises in recent months on a massive scale. Some have included more than 80,000 Russian troops. He routinely has his military planes fly with their transponders off near European shores, playing high-altitude, high-stakes chicken. And Sweden searched its waters for an unidentified signal that some thought was a Russian sub.
The potential for something to go wrong is exacerbated when you have lots of armed people with their fingers on the trigger moving around.
It comes on the heels of tensions over Ukraine, where Russia is accused of sending soldiers and weapons to help rebel fighters. Meeting with the head of the NATO alliance, President Obama expresses concern about what he called
the increasingly aggressive posture that Russia has taken.
A NATO official tells CNN the alliance is concerned by the size, scale, and frequency of Russia's snap exercises. But is NATO ready?
NATO has been increasingly ill-prepared to think about Russia as a threat because it just hasn't done defense planning against Russia. And yet that's what's been playing out in the Russian military over the past several years. These major exercises were meant to begin to demonstrate the possibility of conflict in Europe. Well, that's just not something that was even imaginable among NATO's military leaders.
A U.S. warship and a Russian military jet come a little too close in the Black Sea. says the fighter jet conducted multiple passes near the deck of the USS Ross on Saturday. Russia's state news agency says the ship, our ship, was acting aggressively. These are reports of a similar incident today as well. The Pentagon denies any unusual behavior, saying the ship was well within international waters and performing routine operations. We'll keep you updated as we hear more on that.
This Swiss fighter jet is just one of 100 aircraft taking part in NATO's Arctic exercise this week. The North Atlantic Group brings together, under a quote, self-defense umbrella, the militaries of the US, Canada, Turkey, and 25 European countries, many of them former Soviet states. Moscow sees this as muscle flexing. And this week, without any notice, Russia launched its own exercises. Russia's defense ministry, which released this video, says its, quote, surprise inspection of a number of units included some 12,000 soldiers and hundreds of aircraft and anti-aircraft missiles. It's the latest move in a chess game with Ukraine's future at stake. Washington considers Moscow to be taking a, quote, increasingly aggressive posture, the words used by the US President Barack Obama on Tuesday. His sentiments were echoed by his guest, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
And I urge all parties to fully implement the Minsk agreements, and Russia to stop supporting the separatists and to withdraw all its forces from eastern Ukraine.
Russia denies involvement in the civil war next door and says the US is fueling the conflict. In March, the US delivered an anti-missile system to nearby Poland, quote, in case of need. The White House meeting's agenda also included other topics, among them Afghanistan, and ensuring NATO members support the drawdown of troops, preventing a possible power vacuum, and the threat of ISIL. NATO members have been participating in US-led airstrikes in Iraq, targeting the group's fighters. But on Tuesday, Obama said more may need to be done.
That means increased defense capacity building with other countries like Iraq or GCC countries that are interested in working with us, as well as the African Union. It also means that we have to think about whether we are deploying and arranging our assets effectively to meet that threat.
Both leaders said NATO is crucial, not just for transatlantic security, but for global security. For Moscow, that could look like greater meddling in Russia's backyard. To many, the visible presence of US troops in Tbilisi on Tuesday, participating in Georgia's Independence Day celebrations just south of Russia, is a reminder of that. Now, Obama and Stoltenberg also said that they would continue to defend NATO's traditional frontline states to the east, but that NATO would also look to the south, to places like Libya. That may spell a growing role for global security for what's been dubbed the world's biggest military alliance, and that, of course, may make some other global powers uncomfortable.
We had a chance to discuss the situation in Ukraine and the increasingly aggressive posture that Russia has taken, and we affirmed that NATO is the cornerstone, not just of transatlantic security, but in many ways is the cornerstone for global security.
Seriously, the time is up. People are hip to this kind of stuff. I'm here tonight to blow the lid off it, to be the whistleblower. I'm sick and tired of the secrets and the lies. It is the secret symbol of the Illuminati, and you're a part of it, and it is the all-mocking tongue.
Oh, I like it.
a scraping.
It's the symbol of the all-mocking tongue.
Well, it's comments from a former senior advisor to President Obama that are getting a lot of attention right now today. In fact, in a separate interview with Israeli TV, David Axelrod paraphrased what he recalled the president himself once telling him, quote, "You know, I think I am the closest thing to a Jew that has ever sat in this office. For people to say that I am anti-Israeli or even worse, anti-Semitic, it hurts." That's the president, as paraphrased by David Axelrod.
Earlier this week, I was actually interviewed by one of your members, Jeff Goldberg. And Jeff reminded me that he once called me the first Jewish president. Now, since some people still seem to be wondering about my faith, I should make clear this was an honorary title, but I was flattered.
As Senator, Barack Obama went to a small town in southern Israel to see in his own eyes the lives of the families who live under threat of rockets, families that he has helped protect as commander-in-chief from under the Iron Dome. As president, he stood in Jerusalem and declared to the whole world, quote, "Those who adhere to the ideology of rejecting Israel's right to exist, they might as well reject the earth beneath them or the sky above, because Israel is not going anywhere. So long as the United States of America is there, Israel will never be alone." He means it. He means it. You know I mean it. I'm telling you, he means it.
Well, one of the most volatile borders in the world heating up. Israel retaliating with new airstrikes on Hamas targets in Gaza after rockets fired from the Palestinian enclave. Adding a new element to the conflict, the rocket attacks were claimed by a terror group apparently linked to ISIS.
President Obama gave an interview to Israeli TV this week in an effort to sell a nuclear deal with Iran. It was a little counter-lobbying, if you will, to Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu's huge push here in the States to oppose the deal. Well, in the interview, the president voiced his skepticism about Netanyahu's commitment to a two-state solution. Here it is.
I think that when he spoke right before the election, he was fairly unequivocal in saying that it wouldn't happen during his prime ministership. I think subsequently his statements have suggested that there is the possibility of a Palestinian state. But it has so many caveats, so many conditions, that it is not realistic to think that those conditions would be met any time in the near future.
Right.
And so the danger here is that Israel as a whole loses credibility.
The United States Supreme Court ruled today that Americans born in Jerusalem cannot list Israel as the place of birth on their U.S. passports. The vote by the Supreme Court justices 6-3. For the past 60 years, U.S. policy has been not to recognize any state as having sovereignty over Jerusalem. So the decision is a victory for the executive branch of the U.S. government, affirming its power to recognize foreign states and governments. The case was brought on behalf of a 12-year-old boy whose parents tried to have Israel listed on his U.S. passport as his place of birth. So, Ron Brownstein, what do you make of this 6-3 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court?
I think in the White House, what they're seeing is 6 votes in favor of executive authority over congressional prerogative, including Anthony Kennedy as one of the 6 votes. They may not get 6 votes on the other issues they're facing, but on the EPA regulation of carbon, and even more so on the president's unilateral action on immigration. On both of those issues, ultimately, the Supreme Court will be ruling about executive authority, and I think the White House take at least some comfort from the fact that there was a majority of votes supporting executive authority in this case.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the read on it. I mean, they believe, particularly as you head into the debate over immigration, that what they did was legal, constitutional, etc., because they had the authority under the executive branch. And so this says, yeah, you do have the authority to make diplomatic relations with another country. Congress cannot do that. Only the president and the State Department can.
It's good for the executive branch, this decision, not so good for the legislative, because the legislative branch, they passed a law saying that if you're an American citizen, you have a kid born in Jerusalem, you can list on the passport Jerusalem, Israel. Just like if the kid was born in Tel Aviv, you could say Tel Aviv, Israel, but the administration, Republican administrations and Democratic administrations have said that is not the case.
And we've talked about this before. I think this is the central conflict we're heading for. Divided government between Congress and the White House is more often the case than not now. And I think we've seen President Bush on national security, now President Obama on domestic issues, push the envelope of executive power. And what that ultimately means is the Supreme Court matters more as the voice that says how far you can go. Because what we're learning is Congress cannot stop a president who's determined to push his power, but the courts ultimately can.